Hello and welcome back to this course in Angular. Today, we will discuss about forms and validation. Angular provides a powerful way to handle forms and input validation through its built-in form modules. Here's an overview of how to implement forms and validation in Angular. First, you have to create a form in Angular. You can create a form by using the Forms module or Reactive Forms module. Forms module is used for simple forms, whereas reactive forms module is used for complex forms. Um, Basically, in template driven forms, we use forms module for a simple validation, and for a complex one, we do use reactive forms um, module in our Angular project. Second, we have to bind the form to the component. In order to use the form in your component, you need to bind the form to your component. This is typically done using the ngForm directive. Third step is by adding form controls. Um, you'll need to add form controls to the form. A form control is an object that represents an input field in the form. Then you have to add a validation, wherein you can add a validation to the form control by using built-in validators such as required, minimum length, and maximum length. Or by creating custom validators, you can also use asynchronous validators to validate form inputs against external APIs or other data sources. Display validation messages. Once the form controls has been validated, you can display validation message to the user. Angular provides built-in directives like ngIf and ngMessages to display validation messages. And first of all, this is a example for a template-driven forms here in Angular. Basically, template-driven forms are created using Angular directives in the template of the component. They are easier to set up and use for simple forms that don't require a lot of validation. First step in creating a template-driven, you have to import the forms module into your app module. As you can see in this screenshot, there's a import for the forms module, and this is basically how you import the forms module, and you have to add it in your imports array. And then second, we have to create a form element in your component template. As you can see on the right side, we basically used a form tag, and we created a tag for the input and button for the submit. And then second, we will add um, ng model directive to the form fields that you want to bind the components data. As you can see in the input tag, we have there the ng directive, ng model directive, wherein it is binded to the variable name, and it also has a property of required, so that the user will not miss out inserting a data into this input tag or input field. Then we have to handle the form submission in your component. So basically, inside our component or in the TypeScript file, we created a method called onSubmit that will basically just simply display the name of the user or whatever it is that is inputted in the input field. Basically, in this example, we've created a simple form with an input field for the user's name. We've added the ngModel directive to the input field to bind it to the name. In our component, we've also added the required attribute to make the input field required. Finally, we've handled the form submission by adding an onSubmit method to our component that logs the name property to the console. Note that this is just a basic example of how to create a template-driven form in Angular. you can basically still add more form fields and validation using Angular directives like ng-model, ng-model-group, ng-form, and ng-if. Next is the example for the reactive forms. Basically, reactive forms are created programmatically in the component using the form group, form control, and validators classes. They provide more flexibility and control over the form validation and data handling. In this example, we need to import the reactive forms module first into our app module, wherein as you can see on the left side of the screenshot, there's already imports for the reactive forms module, and it's just basically how you start in creating a reactive forms. Then we'll create a form group in our component wherein it's a um, on the right side of the screenshot or the right side screenshot, as you can see, there is a variable called myForm with a data type called form group, wherein it is also a import um, from from Angular slash forms, and then we created a ng on init which also triggers the this.myForm is equivalent to a form builder wherein it contains a group composed of name, which is required. The null string means that the name is basically null as a default and it's required to put an input there, and also same goes to the email, but basically in email it has a validators dot email command wherein the format of the email should really contain the exact format for email and not just a random string, like for example a example at gmail, at yahoo, at hotmail, or etc. And in messages, it's also required that the user must input something in there. And we will add the form controls to our component template, wherein, as you can see in this example, we've bound the form group to the form group directive. We basically bounded the form group to the form group directive and the form submission to the ng submit event. We've also added the form controls using the form control name directive, which corresponds to the form control names we defined in our component. And then we handle the form submission in our component by creating a method called onSubmit that will basically display the values of the form group that we created. That is basically the name, the email, and the message that we typed in our input field. In this example, we've basically logged the form data to the console using the value property of the form group. This is a basic example of how to create a reactive form in Angular, and you can add more form controls and validations, rules as needed, and you can also nest form groups to handle more complex forms. Don't worry, in our next video, I will show you how these forms are being used in Angular um, with with the help of the Visual Studio Code, so that it's gonna be much clearer for you on how to create this reactive forms and template-driven forms. And maybe late in the later part of this video, we can create a custom validators that will help us customize whatever we need for our application. That would be all. Thank you.